to the program. This is an example of what I would consider an abstract. And kind of put this image in the back of your mind. We'll talk about it a little bit later on. But this evening, we're going to talk about abstracts, the relationship to patterns. And what is an abstract? Abstract art, several definitions. I kind of like to think an abstract is an image where the subject you're looking at isn't what's important. What's important are the lines, the colors, the shapes, the patterns, but not necessarily the subject itself. Whether it be created in camera, whether the abstract be created by something you do in post-processing, both apply. First, we're going to look at lines, colors, shapes, patterns, and what that means to the concept of an abstract. We're going to talk about looking for details in what you see in front of you when you're ready to create an image. The place that reflections play in identifying abstracts, and remembering to look up and down. Looking up, maybe so you don't hit your head on a branch when you're walking down the sidewalk, or looking down so you don't trip over the sidewalk. No. Sometimes there's images, particularly if you're in an urban area walking down the sidewalk, that you may not see if you don't keep your head looking around different directions and seeing what all's there. Shadows can create nice abstracts, and something that we'll tinker with a little bit if I don't talk too long, and that'll be camera in motion photography. Abstracts you can make in your camera that may be a little different than what you've done before. And of course, the place that post-processing plays. Let's look at lines, colors, shapes, and patterns first. What we see here is a blue background with some black bars or lines on it. You're going to find a lot of my pictures have a tilt like this. I've been accused of having one leg shorter than the other, mainly because that original image, the lines were vertical and horizontal. But sometimes using a Dutch tilt, whether you do it post-process like I did here, or whether you do it as you take your image, sometimes adds a lot more dynamics and sense of strength. Let's see, well, my cursor's, I'm used to using a pointer, but the pointer doesn't work in this kind of a digital situation. But I just took a centerpiece out of the image, cropped it a little bit, rotated the image a little bit, and thus ended up with my final abstract. Another example of doing the same thing. The background wasn't a nice blue sky, it was kind of a busy thing. So I took the background all the way to simple black to emphasize the lines created by the window frames. Not only the windows of a building can be the source of an abstract, but the building itself. In this particular building, you may recognize as the California State Office building that's downtown Riverside. And the orange that you see is not something I added to make the picture brighter. That's actually the colors that are on the building. Again, I took it a little bit of a Dutch tilt or Deutsch tilt to make it a little more dynamic. When you see a picture or something that can be an abstract picture, look at it in different ways. Here's a second way of treating that same building. Different tilt, a little bit of a white vignette to focus you in the center, and giving a different feel to the image. When I shot this, it was right near Christmas time, and if you look, you can see the strings of lights. It might have been kind of fun to shoot that at night and see what effect those lights would have had. I'm perseverating on windows and frames because when you're downtown doing urban stuff, they're a great source of abstract. It's kind of a semi-abstract in that you do see a reflection of a building across the street in the background, but I do believe the window frames and the windows are really the main focus of the image, even though there's a little bit of a subject matter showing. Here I go again, windows and sky. Rendering with a little bit of the natural color that was there, or taking it to a simple black and white, thus focusing away from the clouds and onto the lines and forms that are in front of you. Your choice. Getting inside those windows, I'm kind of tired of playing with windows for a while. How about the panels created by these blinds and the pattern created by the staircase? This was going up to the president's booth at the University of Utah Stadium. And again, you really have an abstract in a sense, because what you see are patterns and shapes. You don't really see a unique subject of any sort. So sometimes you can just leave things natural and an abstract is there. But do look and do watch. A little piece of farm machinery, cropped and simplified. And this again points out the fact that all the principles that we learn as we begin our study of composition, you know, the odd numbers, the diagonals and so forth, all of those principles you've learned as you've studied photography apply as well to what might be considered an abstract. Sometimes as you're walking around town, you find a piece of sculpted art on a building. That really is an abstract, and if there's no real true subject or object you identify with, it's just a nice set of shapes and pattern. And frankly, it needs a power wash job, and I wasn't about to use my Photoshop tools to take all that dirt and grime off. So you'll have to tolerate my dirty picture. Again, continuing to look at buildings as a source. On this particular block building, I found a structure consisting of curved and straight pieces and the shadows that were created. What was it? It was actually a very modern rendition of the Christian cross on the front of a Presbyterian church. Again, in a way, you know it's Presbyterian because they do kind of, within that denomination, use a Celtic version of the cross, done in a more mod fashion. But even looking at the original one over here on the right, okay, where's my cursor? There it is. Looking at this version of it, it still has all the elements of an abstract. Whether you want to simplify it out further or not, your choice. Inside a building, a kind of a ceramic-y or shiny type surface, just the pattern of the, hey, come on, get out of there. There we are. Just the pattern on the floor formed an abstract in itself. More colorful abstract, we're really dealing with circles and the patterns formed by the circles. The subject really isn't important. It's the pattern you see that's important, and that's what makes it the abstract. What was this? This was actually a fiberglass type dragon at a Chinese New Year's parade. Just a close-up of a segment of it. As I say, look everywhere, watch for details, keep your eyes open. You'll be surprised what you'll find. This one, I was going through a collection of pictures doing some work last night, and I thought, my gosh, why did I put this in my abstract? By cropping in where I cropped, it took away the feeling of what the objects were. Anyone have an idea what we're looking at here? And I'm not going to hear you because these hearing aids don't work worth a darn. You're right. It's actually a bunch of guitars. But if you crop in close enough and just look at the forms and the shapes, it becomes an abstract, not just a guitar. Okay. Many of you who've known me over the years know that my background is in psychology, and I did study the Rorschach tests. So if you see an animal in that abstract, this is really just a free form. But if you see an animal, I'd be glad to have a consultation session with you after the program. For Redlands Camera Club members, it's free, only for one session. Any rate, to focus on the pattern, which is not a bird, folks, it's just a very loose shaping. This was actually a rusty area on a fender of a very old automobile. I did do a little bit of cloning here to take out some of the distracting elements to simplify it and make it more of a true abstract. Adding bright color. Here's an abstract dealing with shape and dealing with color. It's an abstract because, gosh, it's not a subject or anything. It's just an interesting pattern. And I might add, I do a lot of adding bright colors, working with the saturation, changing the colors around a little bit. And if you haven't tried it, if you use Photoshop and you go to curves, most of us just use curves with all the channels together. If you play around on a color photograph with moving around the diagram on just one channel in the curves, it makes all kinds of interesting colors appear and disappear. And some of these were done by using that technique. You could render it as a black and white, as you see here on the left, focusing not with color catching your eye, but just the shape, or you could leave it natural. This was a rather rusted object. And what was it? I'm sure you're all familiar with Ricardo Braceda, the sculptor that has done the large steel dinosaurs and so forth down on the Borrego Desert. This was a shot I took at his studio, which is not far from where I live. It was the eye of one of his small dinosaurs. But by rotating it and taking away the eye element and playing around with coloration and so forth, it creates an abstract in my judgment. And I must say, an abstract is what you think an abstract is. So if I think it's an abstract, it is to me. You may see something else. And if we get back to Rorschach, we do need that session. Here again, an exploration of free-form shapes and color. Changing the aspect of the image, cropping it a little differently, changing the coloration as we discussed. Again, two different versions of the same thing I saw. Well, what did I see to get this image? Standing at the far eastern end of the Grand Canyon, and if you've been there, that's the little point that has the tower right next to a building. And I was right outside that tower, shooting west down through the structure of the canyon walls. This was after sunset. The sky was just kind of gray and drab. But interestingly, by playing around with the saturation controls, taking them to extreme, there was color in that image, even though the eye and the camera didn't see it. So it's kind of fun when you get to your post-processing, what you can create. This is not really a true camera in motion image. This was taken, and I'm not sure the way the cameras are set up, what I'm going to be doing here, but this was taken using a lens that had a tripod mount, loosening the mount so the lens and camera could rotate, holding the camera's on tripod so it's still. You're holding the zoom hard, and if you take the image while you're rotating the camera, instead of a zoom burst, you get a spiral. Have any of you ever tried that? it's kind of a fun thing to do. At any rate, flowers lend themselves to this sort of thing. This was a bunch of tulips taken a couple of years ago using that technique. An additional group of flowers taken actually the same day, different group, and the zoom was done a little slower and not turned as far. So consequently, you see a more distinct imaging. And I rendered a soft version and a very sharp version. And when you do movement photography like this, you often get a picture that's a little blurry. When you go through Adobe Camera Raw, and I always shoot in RAW, going through Adobe Camera Raw, you crank that clarity and texture control way up, and it sharpens the centers and sharpens the edges significantly. So it's a good little tool to use when we talk about camera in motion, particularly later on. It's almost a necessity to get really interesting pictures. This was not done camera in motion. This was done downtown Chinatown in LA, and each of those black circles are the edge of a rotating disc, and each of these discs were rotating separately from each other. This is what the actual object looked like. A series of discs on a common axle where each disc could rotate separately, and I took a picture while I had all of the discs spinning. So I kind of shot it in camera, so it's kind of a native natural abstract, but I cheated. I spun the discs to make it interesting. Now, this is something where I need to see a counselor. I shot this picture years ago, and I went back to try to find the original image so I could show you the before and after. Can't find it. It may have been something I digitalized from an old shot on film. But at any rate, it's an abstract created in the camera. I think it was shot outdoors. If you look carefully, you can see the essence of some buildings on the side, a skyscraper in the back, and some neon lighting up front, greatly exaggerated with saturation. And I remember it was shot with a very long telephoto lens, with a lens very close to those neon lights that were in the front. But it's an abstract. It's kind of interesting, and I have no idea what the history is to give to you. That's what being 90 this year does. You know, the memory kind of goes bye-bye. You guys aren't there yet, but you'll get there, I hope. Another way to generate an abstract is a traditional zoom burst. And I'm sure you've all done those. Those are kind of fun to do. This was just a bunch of Christmas lights on a tree. I darkened the background down in post-processing to emphasize just the lights. And just a simple zoom burst. Wrong button. There we go. Back to that old farm machinery, another shot. You could take it further and make it a more simple abstract by maybe taking this section out of the picture and just focusing on these two panels and the shapes of them. But I kind of like the additional aspect that these two articles of the structure add to it. Where was this generated from? Well, here's the original picture. Some sort of a furrowing farm machine of some sort. A lot of tree huggers. Don't forget to look at the trees as you go by. An abstract created merely by the white bark, kind of loose rectangular shapes on the darker under structure of the tree, which was brown in color. This is merely a serendipitous find, walking by a tree and seeing an abstract in what I was looking at. Here again, we're looking at a picture that was taken at a 45-degree angle and then cropped. What we're looking at, top to bottom, from this corner down to this corner, are a bunch of very rusty plates that are done in a shiplap type style in a building where the top horizontal panel kind of overlaps at an angle of the panel below it. And those dark bars are nothing more than the shadows of the bottom of each panel. Thrown it, gotta watch what my fingers are doing here. Throwing it at an angle, uh, adding some strong color to it, and I've got an abstract that I thought was kind of fun to make. Now, I've gained a little weight in recent years, but this particular day, at least I got my camera and part of my body inside one of these plastic black crates that you see used commercially to haul maybe bottles of chlorine or stacks of merchandise. Just a black crate. The grass was ugly in the background, so I went in using tonality and strong colors, and I created a different background that I was looking through. There's nothing more than a black crate. Didn't look like much when you walk by it. Again, that's where the mind begins to see the abstracts in what's around you as you're passing by. Now, you guys aren't old enough to remember these old buildings, office buildings. They often had a barber shop in them that had a floor like that. Or if you went in the bathroom, that's what the floor looked like. Ah, I see some nodding heads, and you guys aren't even near my age. At any rate, there it is, an abstract right in front of you. All you got to do is click the button. Again, here's a concrete block wall or concrete brick wall, actually on a building that was built, 1960s, 1970s, thereabouts. And there goes my short leg making the Dutch tilt again. And if we look at it, I actually took the picture that way. That's a cropping of the original picture. Here again, the outer edifice of a building, an interesting pattern. And to me, it's an abstract all by itself because all I see are shapes and patterns. I don't see the fact that it's a building or anything particular. You may know that building. It's the one right next to the Mission Inn, just to the east of it. I think it used to be the Riverside Library. I'm not sure what it is now. Again, just an abstract and expression in color. Some bars separating the color out. I've probably all figured out that was a church stained glass window that was being illuminated. I'm shooting into the building from outside, and the glass was being illuminated by sunlight coming in from the opposite side. So it's a backlit shot. Again, cranking up that hue and saturation, sharpening it a little bit to emphasize the edges and the waviness of the glass. And to me, it's an abstract. Although even by itself, even as the original window, it is an abstract in its natural shape. But I take her. Some of you may be old enough to remember the 1960s and 70s, the hippie van. This is a VW wagon, all bright with hippie colors. This was in an old car museum in Georgia, near Atlanta. And so I got up close to a little segment and I got myself an abstract. Those bloody paint drops are kind of interfering. That's okay. That's what Photoshop's for. But it's an abstract either way. A friend of mine who I was with is a professional photographer. And when I shared this picture with him, we were there together. He had me take him back to where he shot it, and he has it on his website. Again, I did a little bit of work in Topaz Simplify, if you're familiar with that. I don't think Topaz makes that plugin anymore, but they have a plugin called Topaz Studio, and I believe that's been incorporated in part of that. But it gives kind of of a, a frosted glass effect to the image. Or you could tinker around and just go into some strong colors to give a little impact. I call it an abstract because you don't really care what the subject is. Photographically, it's a group of three. It's got some shapes to it. Here's looking at them together, and maybe you recognized a piece of a tractor tire. Again, they're there when you look for them. Like to roam around arboretums and gardens, and I found an abstract. Taking it to black and white made it to me a very strong abstract, or I could have left it in its natural colors. Your choice, my choice, our choice. Up on the seacoast, this was a horizontalish large rock that the waves and the sand and grit that the waves move around had kind of smoothed off over the years. And I looked down and I saw some patterning there, and I thought, you know, that's an abstract. Why not? How about an old piece of well-weathered wood? Okay, this is a wannabe abstract. I saw the bike rack and the shadows, and I thought, man, that's a neat subject to work with. I took the snapshot, got home. This was taken 9 or 10 years ago, and every now and then I visit it, and I'll be darned, I still haven't made an abstract I like. So don't feel bad if you've wasted your time taking a picture that doesn't become the abstract you thought you were going to get. It's kind of a nice picture anyway, but it ain't what I wanted it to be. So don't feel bad about it. Let's focus just on details, which we mentioned on and off. This particular image was taken at the Neon Sign Museum in Las Vegas, if you've been there. Not to Las Vegas, but to the museum. The sign was stood up on end. I looked at just this portion of a letter that had a serif structure on it. And I thought, man, there's an abstract. Close cropped on a detail. This was a large building in Midtown Reno, and the building was painted not just a solid color, but it was painted with these gold bands coming across it. And I thought, man, a piece of that makes a nice abstract. With that kind of a painting of a building, you've probably guessed you can get your fix at the marijuana store in that building. Just an example of colors, bold shapes, shot in the same general location. And by now you may have recognized them as the bright tail sections of some of the old 1920-ish, 1930-ish airplanes. And these were shot in an air museum. If that color is blinding you, why not render it in black and white? Up in Roseville, California, on the side of a building, I saw this interesting structure, and I thought, man, I kind of like that. And this is the natural color. And I thought, you know, that really is a nice picture I'd like to add to my abstract collection. What are we looking at? Well, we can look at it in color. We can look at it again just in tonalities of black and white. The whole object was actually a modern version, really an abstraction of a menorah on the side of a very modern synagogue. They're everywhere, folks. They're hiding from you if you don't look. Nice circular or arc formations, some straight lines in the back, an abstract of lines and form, or was it a plowed, a harvested field up in the Palouse in Washington? And you know, when I looked at this, and I had shot this several years ago, I've used it in a program several times, and I thought, my goodness, you know, there's an abstract hiding right there. So next time I do that program, it's going to have an addition that you guys didn't get to see. All right, you're never going to guess what this is. And you do want to try, go ahead. Raise your hand because I won't hear you. Okay. I kind of like the shapes kind of coming to an apex here, and the forms were somewhat similar. Judith, did you figure out what this was yet? Well, it's something you might find out in nature. I don't know if you call that a bunch of walruses or whether it's walrus, depending upon how your Roman is or your Latin. But I saw that patterning in this little piece of what was in front of me, but I didn't have a strong enough telephoto, so I had to kind of really crop it in hard. Another example of seeing some coloration patterning that was kind of interesting, and there it was, a flower. And in fact, the flower that I started out by just taking this and going some extremes. You guys, most of you know Frank Peel. Pictures I would share at sharing time with the camera club, he would give me a hard time because he thought I saturated beyond this natural look. Yep, I call them photo impressions, and Frank and I argued over it for years. Again, I saw an interesting pattern and shape. Really, it's an abstract in my judgment. This was another shot I made at Ricardo Braceda's studio, and it's a piece of a sculpture he had made of a stagecoach, the suspension system of a stagecoach. I thought it made a kind of an interesting abstract. But you got to look and see those things. They don't label themselves and they don't identify themselves. You got to go looking for them. This one was kind of a natural without doing much to it. A little bit of a spiral, some rectangles, lines in the background. To me, it's a form of an abstract, or at least a near abstract, a pseudo abstract. Here's another one you're never going to guess. It takes a lot of hard look to find that free form patterning, the coloration. What was it? I'll be darned. It's a little piece of galvanized steel, greatly tinkered with in Photoshop. Again, just kind of a fun pattern. Taken from kind of a fun pattern. I just thought I'd kind of crop out that triangular type shape and just focus on the curved lines to simplify it a little bit. They both could probably qualify as an abstract. Reflections. You may wonder what this is. Think of a blue automobile door panel with a pink automobile parked next to it. I don't know how many of you ladies have sold Mary Kay and won your pink Cadillac, but that's what was there. Again, a little bit of Photoshop to simplify it and focus on the shapes I wanted to present. A pond of water with the water making ripples on the top and a reflections of skyscrapers in the background. If I didn't describe that, maybe you'd recognize it and maybe you wouldn't. The picture was taken downtown LA on a very crummy day. And the water was not really showing blue, it was just showing gray and dull. But when I tinkered around with it and brought the saturation up, I found there was color there. I took it from blue to green a little bit because it made it a little different. And again, I like to create my abstracts because it's fun to do. You may recognize this building. This building again is really, and I'm not sure if the material is stainless steel or what it is, but that's what it looks like. And there was a reflection on this building of branches of a tree with the sunlight shining through it, and the branches and the leaves were kind of rippling in the wind. Okay, what were we looking at? You recognize a piece of the Disney Music Hall downtown LA? And here's what I was talking about of the reflection of the sunlight passing through the, well, it's a reflection of the leaves with the sunlight passing through. I thought the bottom here was, I'm so used to using a handheld pointer. I thought the bottom here was kind of ugly, so I did give it a little bit of distortion to my liking. These colors are not colors I created. All they are is taking the saturation up to an extreme. The colors were there in the building. They were just so subdued you didn't see them. Serendipity. Walking downtown LA, walking by the Los Angeles Police Department, and there as a natural abstract reflection was LA City Hall, right there for the taking. Didn't even have to think, just point the camera and shoot. Closer to the Bunker Hill area of LA, kind of the same concept, but I did a little bit of tinkering with this. The actual picture as taken was as you see there in the insert. But by a little bit of cropping, a little bit of stretching out horizontally of the image and changing the coloration a little bit, I created an abstract that I kind of enjoyed. Following the same concept again, I'm just a sucker for reflections on buildings. This is again, as I saw it, but as I saw only a small piece of what was in front of me. And to tell you the truth, I didn't see that till I got home and looked at the whole picture. But there it was, an abstract I kind of enjoyed as a piece of a building reflecting in another building across the street. Is this an upside down goblet? Is it a wine glass upside down? What is it? It's a reflection in the stainless steel refrigerator in my house. I turned it upside down from what it was, and again tinkered with the colors. More natural reflection, Guadalupe River in Texas, a fall color, and just a natural reflection, natural abstract for the taking. A little busier abstract, same concept, a lot of fall color. Same thing up in the Sierras. Might want to flip it over, and instead of seeing the reflection of the trees coming towards you, stand them up and create an abstract of trees. Jim Hendon, stand up. This is your picture. Jim's back in the corner there. About 10 years ago, he gave me permission to use this picture that he had shared with me. And I hope his permission didn't have a time limit on it because I'm sharing Jim's abstract here. Jim's taken abstracts for many years, and he sometimes shoots them off and shares them with me. In fact, some of those Reseda pictures that I shot, Jim was with me the day I shot them. Some of them were taken just this past couple of months.
What is it?
What is it, Jim? Right. Just a bunch of masks with they're upside down as a reflection with a water rippling. Come on, get away from Jim there.
Yeah, move your mouse down.
There we go. Yeah, my cursor was off the image. Remember, look up. How many of you wandered through Union Station, downtown LA? Steph, I know you have with your job. We talked about that a lot once. Did you ever look up and see the dome? You didn't? It's right near the entrance where you go out to catch the buses. Right. But of those of you who never looked up, there was a nice abstract right there to catch your eye. I'm sure you photographed it. Coming out from one of the subway stations from the metro downtown LA and looking up as I'm walking up, I saw an abstract right there, created by the structure of the canopy. They had to give you a little protection, either from the weather or the pigeon droppings. I'm not which, but at any rate, giving you a little protection. In the background, some of the LA skyscrapers. An abstract that was there for the gathering, if you bothered to look up. Laying on my living room, doing my morning exercise, and I have in the living room that I had sloped ceilings, kind of like an A-frame might have, and then it had, where there were windows, kind of a cutout structure in the ceiling like you might have leading to a gabled window. And the light was different on the different slopes of these surfaces. And I thought, wow, there's an abstract there for the taking. Had to get up, which again, at my age is a little hard to do. But I got up, got my camera, got back down. There's my abstract. Done nothing to it other than snap the button. Don't forget to look down, because down below, there may be just an interesting crosswalk. If the traffic will allow, stop and get a shot. If you're out in the desert and you're crossing a dried, muddy area, just the dried mud creates all kinds of interesting patterns. And here's an example of one. And if you saw Genghis Khan with his head tipped, again, remember the counseling session. Floor tiles just yield all kinds of examples for you. Just patterns, abstracts there for the grabbing. We talked about shadows being a possibility. This was a bamboo shadow on a stucco wall out in the outside area of the Catholic Cathedral downtown LA. White sands, sand dune, very close to a sunset, and the wind ripples of the sand with the light just skipping very horizontal across the ripples. And I took it to a very harsh black and white tonality. Just ripples in the sand. The dark, of course, being the deep part of the ripple light couldn't get to. Here's a open veranda cover, seeing the reflection on a yellow colored wall. Again, here's a shadow, of this case, a steel staircase, and I chose to leave the background as it was. So it's kind of an abstract in a sense, and it's a picture of a shadow in a sense. Thinking of staircases, here's a diamond stair plate staircase, both the step and the riser, and the steel bars creating the railing, and the shadows created by the railing, making an abstract. And I stood there and I took a whole bunch of different images, because once you find a topic, you may find there's a whole bunch there. All these are the same staircase, either in black and white. They were lightly colored. They were kind of a yellowish color. This was out in a Bureau of Management area, but I exaggerated the colors. They were slightly yellow stairs with a green railing, but it kind of made it interesting, both black and white and in color. talked about camera in motion. Hopefully we'll have some time. This was done with a camera starting in the upper left and coming to the lower right, taken at about 1/4 of a second. I start moving the camera, press the shutter button, keep moving until it stops. And what I get is this blurred motion effect. This is all done in camera. The only thing done post-processing is using texture and structure to give it more sharpness and maybe strengthen the colors a little bit. But the entire motion and the abstract effect are all an in-camera thing. Another example, and I found if you want the blue sky to show, you got to do a very short motion, because if you do it too long, the doggone trees and sky all blend together. So the length of your motion, the speed of your motion, each creates a different effect. These were organ pipes, which each had a colored light on them. These were small pipes that you could photograph together at the Peterson Museum in LA. And again, camera in motion of these colored lights. Again, coming at a diagonal, this was a mural, had a rainbow in the background. You may recognize shapes of some people there, their body and head. But if you don't recognize that, and I don't mention it, it's just an abstract. This was, again, a grading works on the backside of the museum, camera in motion shot. A part of the grading was horizontal on the sidewalk, and part of it was vertical on the side of the building. And I'm capturing part of each, camera in motion. If you like fuchsias, here's a nice effect. Camera in motion with a motion done in kind of an arc fashion. And this, usually these are taken at or about 1/4 of a second to 1/2 a second. Oftentimes when I take them, and it must be the motion of the camera metering, picking up different light, because oftentimes I'll find my picture is either very shallow and pastel, or it's very dark. So you do have to play around with it. Again, done in an arc. This is done by pausing before you start the movement, pausing for a fraction of your exposure, then quickly moving. And it gives you kind of a doubled image effect. This was done by pausing before I start and a short pause at the tail end. You got to kind of play with the timing, because all this is within somewhere between a second and 1/4 of a second. Sometimes it takes maybe 50 or 100 pictures of tinkering before I get one just right. Often I give up before I get it. Brief comment on plugins. We've mentioned them, but sometimes you can just use the plugin itself. This is one called Polar Coordinates in the filter section of Photoshop, and it was a brick building. Another one using polar coordinates with some different settings, and it was a vendor's display of sunglasses down in Venice. This was done with just the blur function within Photoshop. This was motion blur, and it was actually a petticoat in a store that sold the gowns for what is it, the quinceañera celebration that the Hispanics often have, and this was a petticoat. The colors were either there from reflection of light or they were in the fabric. Again, hue saturation brought it out. Again, using the motion blur and using what's called cutout, a filter in Photoshop. And what was it? It was a picture of a flower. I did clone out the center because that brown left in made some kind of ugliness to the picture. So sometimes you got to simplify it before you do your Photoshop work. Another example of using frosted glass, stained glass, and cutout. Those are all found in Photoshop's filter gallery, and they're kind of fun to play around with. There's hundreds of settings you can use on each of these filters, so you can make all sorts of variants. And this was the dream catcher, a whole collection of them that a vendor had on display. That was the source of the image. I talked to you about the abstract that was the very beginning. This actually was an abstract taken from that same dream catcher and just using a little different setting to get an extreme of the formations that cutout gives you. I did pass it through and do it in 2 steps. I passed it through, oh, I'm not used to using the mouse to do this. I passed it through this step before I took it on to the cutout. This is using the same cutout filter in Photoshop. And would you guess it was a shot of the rafters of a covered bridge in Oregon, and the segment I used was right here. Back to those old bathroom tiles, tinkering around with some filters that Photoshop has. And these were all taken from this structure. These were various twirl and zooming type filters that are there. Again, back to my old fetish on buildings and reflections, a totally different type of abstract created by using a filter called mezzotint, layering on that a filter Photoshop has called radial blur, and then layering on top of that twisted blur. And you get, with these layers all done together and blending together, you get a real interesting patterning. And by varying the various controls, you get a whole bunch of those. And Bob Upton and I have a collection of things we're done with that combination. Not a abstract in a sense, but it is an impression that's different than your original. Not only do I tinker with abstracts, but as many of you know, you've had to sit through my fisheye program as well. That brings us to an end. If you have questions or comments, I may have to filter them through Bruce because my hearing aids are giving me a lot of trouble. And that brings us to the end.